Well, good Sunday evening, everyone. It is February the 14th, and I am absolutely thrilled that you have decided to check in for Bible class tonight as we continue our look at the book of Proverbs. If you've got your Bibles, you'll want to turn them to Proverbs chapter 26. That's where we begin tonight, Proverbs chapter 26. I hope that everyone is doing well. I hope you've had a good week. I hope today has been the start of another good week. I can't think of a better way to start a week than with Bible study, worship this morning, and now Bible study this evening. I'm just looking forward to the time when, hopefully in about 3 weeks, we will be back together again in person on Sunday night. I hope that most of you will be able to join us. If you're not, we will continue to live stream that. And we're going to begin a new topic, and I will talk about that really soon. I'll announce that. In the meantime, let's take a look at chapter 26 of the book of Proverbs. Really, this section actually begins with the very last verse in chapter 25. The last verse in chapter 25 said, "Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit." What really begins at that point is the portrait of a fool. And that portrait is going to go all the way through verse 12 of chapter 26. Verse 28 of chapter 25 there, that last verse of the last chapter, is part of the portrait of a fool. A fool is someone who doesn't have self-control. And as a result of that, they are vulnerable to so many things. The maneuverings of not only Satan, but so many people. They are just completely vulnerable because they just have no self-control. Well, let's continue that then, that portrait of a fool, as we begin with chapter 26 and verse 1. "Like snow in summer and like rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool." Snow in summer and rain in harvest. Those are two things that just don't fit. Snow doesn't fit with summer, and rain doesn't fit with harvest. Usually during the harvest time was a very dry time of year. It just didn't rain. If it did, it was going to be something that was going to be destructive. But like snow in summer and like rain in harvest, as unfitting as those combinations are, so honor is not fitting to a fool. Honoring a fool is inappropriate. It's as inappropriate as snow in summer and rain in harvest. Fools should not be honored. Well, what if we're really trying to encourage them, and so we do that to encourage them? No, that doesn't encourage them. It doesn't encourage them to award them for being a fool. It doesn't encourage them. Put that completely out of your mind. It is inappropriate to honor a fool. Verse 2. "Like a sparrow in its flitting, like a swallow in its flying, so a curse without cause does not alight." It doesn't land, in other words. A reproach from a fool, and again, the whole context here is a foolish person. A fool reproaches you, a fool curses you. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to be ineffective. It's going to be ineffective. It's not going to be effective against you. And the reason are, people consider the source. And that's what this means. A curse without cause. It doesn't land. It's like a sparrow that's just flitting around and never lands anywhere. Or the swallow that's flying around. It's like, does the thing ever land? Does the thing ever land? In the same way, a fool who pronounces some kind of curse on you, if people know who they are, it's not going to land because they consider the source. You know that expression. Oh yeah, just consider the source. Okay. Verse 3. "A whip is for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of fools. The idea here is fools don't learn from wise reproof. You know, last week, if you were here and we looked at over in chapter 25, one of the things that we looked at was verse 11, how in 11 and 12, Solomon compares wise counsel to a beautiful piece of jewelry, a masterpiece of jewelry. And he says that's a wise reprover to a listening ear is like that. Well, there are some people who have a listening ear and they respond to wise reproof. They treasure it. But fools don't. Fools don't learn from wise reproof. And so the only language that they understand is force. That's what he's talking about here. A whip's for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of the fool. There's just some people who don't get it. And, you know, they just, well, for lack of a better description, they just have to be pounded. Or they just don't get it. They don't respond to reproof. Verse 4, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will also be like him. Verse 5, answer a fool according to the folly he deserves, that he not be wise in his own eyes. Okay, now that's interesting. Don't answer a fool according to his folly, verse 4. Answer a fool as his folly deserves in verse 5. Okay, let's take these one at a time. No, they're not contradictory. No, they're not in opposition to one another. They're saying two different things. Verse 4 is saying, don't engage in the same kind of emotionally abusive language that the fool uses. That's how fools speak. They usually just engage in emotionally abusive language. And you don't want to imitate that because it may become habitual in you. See, look at it. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will also be like him. Don't get into those habits of responding like fools do. Now we come to verse 5. But sometimes, when it comes to fools, you have to answer them in words that they understand in order for the reprimand to be effective. And that's what verse 5, answer a fool as his folly deserves, that he not be wise in his own eyes. Sometimes you just have to, get it down to language that a fool gets when you're dealing with them. Because they're not going to get it any other way. Okay, look at verse 6. He cuts off his own feet and drinks violence, who sends a message by the hand of a fool. Sending messages, the whole idea was that if you send someone a message, it's important. And if something is an important message, you need someone who's reliable. You didn't send messages by fools. If you choose to send a message to someone via a fool, then it's going to be like cutting your own feet off or drinking violence, drinking poison. Who in their right mind would chop their own foot off? Well, nobody. Who in their right mind would drink violence? Nobody. Who in their right mind would send an important message with a fool? Nobody. If you do that, it's like cutting your own feet off or drinking violence. It continues here in verse 6. Like the legs which are useless to the lame, so is a proverb in the mouth of the fool. See, it continues to express just how unreliable fools are. Like the legs which are useless to the lame, so is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Fools who go around giving counsel. Yes, sometimes fools think that they know everything. And so they will come around and they'll give you some counsel. And the point is, they're not going to help. Their words won't help anyone. They're like the legs of a paralyzed person. It's a pretty powerful image. The legs of a paralyzed person, frankly, you know this. They're not useful anymore. They're just not useful. In the same way is counsel from a fool. No one is going to take a fool's words seriously because they just are impotent. They won't help. Look at verse 8. Like one who binds a stone in a sling, so is he who gives honor to a fool. Remember back in verse 1, honor's not fitting for a fool. Here he follows that up with, if you give honor to a fool, it's like someone who binds a stone in a sling. You know, if you picture a sling, it's two pieces of string, leather straps, and there would be a leather pouch in it, and you put your stone there, and you hold it together, and you're swinging it around and around and around and around, and at some point, those who are gifted in the art of using slings in the ancient world, they would let go of one end of that string, and as they let go of one end of that string, that rock would come, flying out like a missile. Well, he says, now picture strapping the rock into that little pouch so it can't fly out. So imagine swinging it around, trying to let it go, and it doesn't fly out. And the force that has been, generated by swinging it around, if that rock doesn't leave, if it stays attached to that pouch, you're in some serious trouble. That's not a smart thing to do, bind a rock into a sling. That's asking for a disaster of epic proportions. Well, in the same way, he said, like one who binds a stone in a sling, so is he who gives honor to a fool. Again, it's just important to emphasize how absurd it is to honor a fool. It is not only absurd, it can be dangerous. And so again, no buts, ifs, ands, or maybes about that. As my dad used to say, no buts, ifs, ands, or maybes about it. There is no time that is appropriate to give honor to a fool. If you're trying to somehow encourage him, find a different way. Don't honor him. Don't reward foolishness. Okay, verse 9. Like a thorn which falls into the hand of a drunkard, so is a proverb in the mouth of fools. What's being implied here is a lack of response on the hearer's part. People aren't going to respond to the proverb, to the counsel of a fool. People who know that person aren't going to respond to it. It's like a thorn in a drunkard's hand. They're so drunk they don't even feel it. They don't respond to it. In the same way, nobody's going to respond to the counsel, the proverbs of a fool. Number 10, verse 10, that is, like an archer who wounds everyone, so is he who hires a fool or who hires those who pass by. Like an archer who wounds everyone. Of course, that's the ancient equivalent of someone who has let's say they have an automatic rifle and they just don't know how to use it and they hold the trigger down and they're just spraying it everywhere. And that's what it's like for the person who hires a fool. It is dangerous. It is not smart. It's going to be destructive. Don't put fools in positions that they are not qualified for. Do not put fools in a position that they're not qualified for. It will be destructive. You got to be careful about who you have in positions of leadership. You don't put a fool there. That's like an archer who wounds everyone. Okay, like at verse 11, like a dog that returns to its vomit is a fool who repeats its folly. This is fools. A dog that returns. Fools don't learn from their mistakes. That's just part of being a fool. We all see it. We may know some people. We may have some acquaintances. We may have some family members who epitomize this. Mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. And you would think that they would go, I think I'm going to try a different course. But nope. They just keep ramming their head against that same wall. They just don't learn. Or, to use the image here, like a dog that returns to its vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. Verse 12, do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. A man who is wise in his own eyes, that is a person who is not teachable. It is a person, he knows everything. There is no need for him or her to listen to anyone because they've got all the answers. People who are like that, people who are unteachable, are worse off than the run-of-the-mill fool. You got your run-of-the-mill fools, and then you've got your people who are unteachable, and they take foolishness to a whole nother level. Okay, that was quite a section. Verse 28 of chapter 25, all the way through verse 12, 13 verses that paint the portrait of a fool. Okay, let's look at verse 13 now. What you have in verse 13 through 16, just like you had the portrait of a fool in verse 28 of chapter 25, all the way through verse 12 of chapter 26. Now in verses 13 through 16, you have the portrait of a sluggard, of a lazy person. I mean, the book of Proverbs has had a lot of emphasis, hasn't it, on sluggards and laziness. So we see it again here. The sluggard says, there is a lion in the road. A lion is in the open square. Okay. I think we've seen this idea before, back in chapter 22 and verse 13. And the point I told you back then is the same here, and that is lazy people can come up with the most outrageous excuses to avoid work. They are just masters at avoiding work. There's a lion in the road. There's a lion in the open square. I can't get out and work. All right. Yeah, whatever. There's always a way that they can dodge working. Verse 14, take a look at it. As the door turns on its hinges, so does the sluggard on his bed. It's like this, it's a kind of a, there's humor in that statement there. It's, the sluggard, the lazy person, they move, but it's like their only movement is in bed. And of course that's hyperbole, but that's just what it's saying. They're just so lazy that the only time they'll be moving is when they're in bed, rolling from one side to the other. Look at verse 15. We've seen this one before. We saw this back in chapter 19 and verse 24. But again, a very vivid picture of laziness. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish, and he is weary of bringing it to his mouth again. It's a picture of laziness, as I said back in chapter 19, taken to ludicrous lengths. He's hungry, he reaches for the food, but he's so lazy that he just can't bring his hand up to his mouth. And verse 16, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can give a discreet answer. It's amazing. The portrait of a sluggard, the portrait of a lazy person is like this. They just find the most outrageous reasons in the world to dodge work. It's like they just won't even move at all unless it's in bed. And, it's ludicrous how lazy they are. And again, this picture of reaching into a dish for food and to being too lazy to even put it to your mouth. Well, at the same time, those kind of people, it's not uncommon that they will often think they are wise. For whatever reason. They will often fancy themselves to be people of great wisdom, to know the way of the world, the ways of the world. And they are so glad to part with the counsel. I just kind of mentioned that a couple of times a moment ago when he talks about Proverbs in the mouth of a fool. Nobody's going to take them seriously. And they shouldn't take him seriously. The sluggard, though, is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can give a discreet answer. No matter who's telling them what, wise people, no. They know everything, and they can share their counsel with anyone. That is the portrait of a sluggard. Now we have another portrait here in verses 17 through verse 22, and it is the portrait of a busybody. Take a look at it, verse 17. Like one who takes a dog by the ears is he who passes by and meddles with strife not belonging to him. I've had a couple of dogs. I have never decided to drag them around by the ears. I would never decide to drag them by the ears. I don't know what would happen, but I have a pretty good sense of what would happen. And that is, it would not be a wise move on your part. The dog won't like it, and the dog will let you know that he doesn't like it. Like one who takes a dog by the ears is he who passes by and meddles with strife not belonging to him. Busybodies inject themselves into other people's disputes uninvited. It's okay if someone invites you into their dispute and they're looking for some wise counsel. This is not that. This is injecting themselves in. Resist the temptation to inject yourself into private disputes. To do so, you might as well go grab that German shepherd by the ears and try to drag him around. Verse 18 and 19, they go together. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death, so is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, was I not joking? This is a person with a hidden agenda. We might call this person passive-aggressive. They have this hidden agenda. They want to hurt you, but they create the appearance of just being playful with you. We've seen those people. Sometimes they're caricaturized on television in a sitcom or something. But that's this person. That's like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. This kind of person with a hidden agenda. This is a person to be avoided. They're not helpful. They're not beneficial. Their purpose is to hurt. And yet they try to portray it as just being playful. It's disgusting. Verse 20 and 21. For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisper or contention quiets down. Like charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. Okay. The point here is that slanderers fuel quarrels. There are just some people by their very nature who throw, we would say gas on the fire, but the proverb here says throws wood on the fire or charcoal on the fire. There are some people who just insist on throwing gas, fuel on the fire. And he says, when these people are gone, discourse often dies a natural death. There's some people that once they're gone, it's like, this office used to be fighting all the time. But it's so peaceful lately. Why? Well, Joe's gone. Oh yeah. Because there's just some people who they just fan the flames of dissension and quarrel. That's what this is all about. Where there is no whisper, contention quiets down. Okay, look at verse 22 as we continue to look at the portrait of a busybody. The words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they go down into the innermost parts of the body. This is a direct warning to us. gossip makes its way to the innermost parts of our being. And the implication there, as it makes its way to the innermost parts of our being, is that it corrupts us internally. It corrupts the soul. And so it is a warning against that. Okay, let's look at verses 23 through 28 now. This will wind up the chapter. Now, we've looked at the first part of the chapter was the portrait of a fool. The next part, verses 13 through 16, was the portrait of a sluggard, a lazy person. The next part, verses 17 through verse 22, was the portrait of a busybody. And now here in verses 23 through 28, we have the portrait of a liar. Let's look at verse 23. Like an earthen vessel overlaid with silver dross are burning lips and a wicked heart. A clay pot, in other words, like an earthen vessel overlaid with silver dross. A clay pot that is lacquered over gives it an appearance of something that it's not. It gives it the appearance of something valuable. You didn't really lacquer over. You didn't silver plate gold pots. It would give it the appearance of something that it's not. And liars are like this. Those with burning lips and a wicked heart. That is a liar in context. They're like this. They have the appearance of something that they're not. They may have the appearance of a good person, but if they're a liar, they are not that at all. Verse 24. He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, do not believe him. For there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred covers itself with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. What's going on in verses 23 through 26 here is really, it's expanding and explaining that statement in verse 23. Like an earthen vessel overlaid with silver dross, so are the burning lips and a wicked heart. It's expanding on that. The words of this person, they're phony. They're phony. Do not believe them. They're phony. And verse 26, sooner or later, everyone knows that the fool is a liar. Everyone is going to know. Though his hatred covers itself with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. Everyone's going to eventually know he is what he is. Okay, look at the last 2 verses. Verses 27 and 28. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone, it will come back on him. A lying tongue hates those it crushes, and a flattering mouth works ruin. This proverb here in verse 27, he who digs a pit will fall into it. That was a very common Old Testament proverb. The idea is those who disrupt community life and solidarity with lying, they're going to suffer the consequences. It's going to be like the person who digs a pit and falls into it. With your lies, with your guile, with your, in the words of verse 22, or verse 23 rather, with your burning lips and your wicked heart, you're destroying things. You're digging a hole. You're going to eventually fall into that. You will ultimately suffer the consequences. He who rolls a stone, and it comes back on him. There are going to be consequences ultimately for that kind of behavior. Now, even if you are able to dodge it, now in most cases, eventually, like verse 26 says, in most cases, sooner or later, everybody's going to know that the fool is a liar. But sometimes there is that rare instance. Remember, these are Proverbs. There are exceptions to these rules, and sometimes the person may get away with it. They will not always, however, get away with it. They will eventually fall into the pit. If they don't, in the here and now, they're going to eventually stand before God, and they are going to then experience the consequences of their destructive, evil behavior. Verse 28, the last verse in this portrait of a liar, a lying tongue hates those it crushes, and a flattering mouth works ruin. You say, well, liars despise truth. Well, yeah, that's true. But verse 28 says, liars don't just despise truth. They actually despise the people they lie to as well. Look at it again. A lying tongue hates those it crushes. They don't just hate the truth. They hate you. When you lie to someone, you're showing your disdain not only for the truth, but you're showing your disdain for them. When someone lies to you, they're not only showing their disdain for the truth, they're showing their disdain for you. A lying tongue hates those it crushes, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Okay. Well, we finished another chapter. Chapter 26. Got a couple of more weeks. We'll take on a couple of more chapters. Tell you what we're going to probably do. Next week, we're going to take on chapter 27. And then we'll have 1 week left in Proverbs. There's no way we'll cover 28, 29, 30, and 31. What we will probably do is we will not look at chapter 28 and 29. It's just a continuation of these Proverbs that started in chapter 27, or chapter 26 rather. I'm sorry, let me say that again. It continues a section that begins in chapter 25. I told you chapter 25 through 29 is really kind of a separate book within the book of Proverbs, as these Proverbs of Solomon were edited and compiled by Hezekiah's men, and it's a continuation of these things that we've seen. So we'll end at chapter 27. We'll bounce over in our last time together, and we will do some selected things from chapter 30 and then 31, the description of the worthy woman. That is always something that I enjoy taking a look at, and others do as well. Okay, so we will put an end to today's lesson. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, joining us for Bible study. I'm so glad that you did. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope you got as much out of it as I have. Hope to see you real soon. In the meantime, take care and God bless.